Our podcast partner for this session is Launchora.
We're delighted to welcome you back to the 14th Jaipur Literature Festival here at the front lawn at Digi Palace, Jaipur. The 14th Jaipur Literature Festival is protected by Dettol. It's our pleasure to present now Brown Baby, Nikesh Shukla in conversation with Nish Kumar. In Brown Baby, Nikesh Shukla explores themes of racism, feminism, parenting and our shifting ideas of home. By turns heart-wrenching, hilariously funny and intensely relatable, the memoir is dedicated to the author's two young daughters and serves as an act of remembrance to the grandmother they never had a chance to meet. In this emotionally stirring session, Shukla navigates the porous boundaries of love, grief and fatherhood in conversation with British stand-up comedian, radio host and presenter Nish Kumar, ultimately showing us how it's possible to believe in hope. Nikesh Shukla is a novelist and screenwriter. He's the author of Coconut Unlimited, shortlisted for the Costa First Novel Award, Meet Space, and the critically acclaimed The One Who Wrote Destiny. He's the editor of the best-selling essay collection, The Good Immigrant. He co-edited The Good Immigrant USA with Shimeen Suleiman. He's the author of two YA novels, Run, Riot, shortlisted for a National Book Award, and The Boxer. His new book, Brown Baby, a memoir of race, family and home, will be released on Bluebird in February 2021. Nish Kumar is a comedian and a host of the MASH Report on the BBC. He has a half-hour on Netflix as part of the Comedians of the World series. He was a contributor to The Good Immigrant. Please do remember to comment by typing it in the comment section. Ladies and gentlemen, we now present Brown Baby, Nikesh Shukla in conversation with Nish Kumar.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to Brown Baby, my interview with the author and my very good friend, Nikesh Shukla. Nikesh, hello.
Nish, hello. How you doing?
Yeah, I'm good. I should just say, for the benefit, especially of people watching this in India, the United Kingdom is continuing on its quest to set a Guinness World Record for the longest lockdown in human history. So we're still in a full lockdown. So we're still all working from home. I understand in different parts of the world, you've done things like control the pandemic and get your numbers down. But in Britain, we've decided to just let the damn thing run riot. We've decided that as punishment for 200 years of us spreading disease around the world, we've decided to take a bit of it back for ourselves, all of which is an explanation for why so the barbers are shut, which is basically what I'm trying to tell you. And that is why I look like Tom Hanks in the final third of Castaway. And my Wilson today is the novelist Nikesh Shukla. Although I will say this, Nikesh, you're looking remarkably well turned out for somebody who I know is also in the same lockdown as me. What's going on? What are you doing? Why do you look so much neater than me?
I hate to make it hot for you, Nish, but I know how to use my clippers, whereas you, it would appear, do not know how to use your clippers.
No idea how to use clippers. No idea. Are you clipping your hair as well?
No. This is just. It's just the longer it gets, the grayer it looks, and I think that just distracts from the
I don't know. I think it's giving you a sort of air of gravitas.
Yeah, that's what you want at a literature festival, an air of gravitas.
Yeah, it's certainly needed in this talk, where I, as a comedian, carry no intellectual gravitas whatsoever, and rightly so. No one should ever confuse comedians with knowing anything about anything. So before we get into the book, how are you? I feel that we should make some obligatory COVID era small talk. How are you doing? How are you handling it?
What's really strange about answering this question to you, knowing that people are watching, is I speak to you every Sunday.
Yeah,
Hours.
I didn't know if we were going to reveal that early. I guess the cat is out of the bag. I know everything about you. I don't think that there has been a day of lockdown where I've not corresponded with you in some way, whether it's a phone call, a video chat, or a text message.
Yeah.
So I mean, really, I'm asking you this for the benefit of the people watching. I could answer this question on your behalf.
I am all right. I've kind of got to that point where, you know, I mean, it's got to be the same for you, where like there are large swathes of our jobs that we can't do properly,
Yeah.
and you know, part of the job of being a writer is being out in the world, and my world just feels so small and sort of all pushed through this portal, and so I feel okay. I put up some fence panels yesterday and today, and I feel like if you ignore the one that is very, very wonky, I felt a sense of achievement. How about you? Like, it must be a really hard time being a comedian, not being able to do pretty much 90% of your job.
Yeah, it's definitely a strange thing. I mean, when you're coming through as a comedian, the one thing that older acts will always tell you is always keep your live work going. Television is a mysterious and capricious beast, and you can never rely on the whims of television commissioners. So you have to constantly keep your live work going. And that's the thing that's going to feed you through your career and into old age, right? So it is a bit weird when the one thing that's supposed to be a certainty is pulled out from underneath you. But like broadly, I'm absolutely fine. And in order to get us towards talking about the book, I mean, one of the sort of key underpinning themes of the book is how you talk to your children about difficult world events. You know, how you talk to your children about racism and sexism and the prejudices that they may grow up and face. So just before we talk about that, I just want to ask you, because I'm really curious and asking lots of my friends who have young children about this, how are you talking to your children about what's happening right now? Like, how are you explaining to them why they're not going to school or why they're not able to see their grandparents?
We're being really honest with them about it. You know, they know that there is a virus. They know that they should be keeping their distance from people. They know that they should be washing their hands. They know that things are very changeable, and you can kind of tell the impact that it's having on their mental health. But I'd much rather they just be prepared for it. But you know, with the fact that they are being quite resilient when it comes to like flexibility, every time I make a mistake, like it's a big mistake. So like my kid's going to school on Mondays because she has a key worker place on Mondays because my partner's doing work, and last Monday was an inset day, and I got dressed. We'd completely forgotten it. Got her dressed up, took her to school. The school was completely shut, and she was just like, she just crumbled.
Oh man.
And you kind of realize that like the small bits of routine that she's able to have are the things that are really holding her together at the moment.
Right.
But it's sort of, I think it sort of feeds into like the thing in the book, which is like, how do I have conversations with my kids about what is going on in the world, but I sort of strip away my cynicism from it, and I just try and explain the world as they experience it. Because as you were saying at the top, like if I talk to them about how I really felt about coronavirus and the bungling of our government and the absolute catastrophe of ineptitude after ineptitude after ineptitude that, you know, has cost people's lives. You know, just this morning I found out about another death in our extended family, and you know, you kind of think about the grief that so many people are going through, where it's like it's like a grief in stasis because they're not experiencing the physicality of that grief, which I think is a really important part of the process. And we're just sort of all crashing towards this mental health crisis. Like, I'm not telling her all of that. I'm just telling her that, fuck you. Just wash your hands, right? Just please.
Yeah. Is it about keeping things very small scale and very achievable, like please wash your hands, rather than we are careening towards a mental health crisis for a whole generation.
Yeah, like the days I wake up and I think, oh my god, this is just it for the rest of our lives. Where you know that panic that I can't remember who it is in the first Alien film has, where it's like, it's 2 more days and it's game over, man. You know, like that I sometimes wake up with that doom-filled panic in me. I try and keep that away from them, but
Yeah, sure.
at the same time, I'm trying to keep them away from people, because people are carrying the disease.
Yeah.
But they've been really good about all that stuff.
I mean, I think it's one of the things that makes the book, because the book and the conversations in the book are so timely. It's interesting that even the circumstances through which it's now being released, I think in a weird way make what you're talking about feel even more timely. Like, how do you engage in conversation with younger generations about big scary things that are going on? But I want to put a pin in that and come back to it later on in the conversation, because there's like a lot to talk about with this book. But I want to sort of look at it through the prism of you as a writer and where you feel this book sits in your body of work. Because as a fan of your work and looking at it from an external perspective and reading particularly the work you've done in the last few years, and I'm thinking, not just of the activist side of your work, but also things like the young adult books, like Run Riot and The Boxer, are both incredibly readable novels, but there's also a subtext within both of them about talking about serious issues in a form that's specifically aimed at young adults. And
Yeah.
when I think about everything that you've written in the last few years, it really feels like this book is the logical culmination of a lot of different strands of your career. But I'm aware that I'm viewing that as an external observer. And so for me, looking at it from an outsider's perspective, I'm looking at it going, oh, it really feels like Nikesh is building up to something, in the way that as an outsider, if you look at like a band like Radiohead, you sit there and you go, well, okay, the bend leads to OK Computer, and then the reaction against that is Kid A. But I'm also aware that when you're inside the process, it may not feel that organic at all. So where did the genesis of this book come from? And did you feel like this is something you've been building up towards writing for a couple of years?
No is the simple answer. I mean, I think there are key points in my career where things have blown up in a big way, in a really unexpected way. And I think when I first started out with Coconut Unlimited in 2010, I wanted to write comedic fiction. My first two novels are like comedy satires, and it was only just years before I started putting together The Good Immigrant, of which you are of that parish. Like, obviously, I'd become a youth worker again, and doing all that youth work really put a fire in me that I just hadn't felt for a really long time. Like doing localized grassroots youth work in Bristol, and I've just signed on to volunteer to do a bit more youth work, because I just felt like it was really lacking in my life since I stopped on that project. And like doing that youth project, it made me think I want to do something that is going to be talking to young people of color in the UK about race. So that's what The Good Immigrant became. Also, in talking to these young kids who I was working with about the stuff that they read, they felt like they just could never find books that talked about contemporary social issues that were relevant in the UK. Well, in a UK context that were relevant to them. They had to kind of farm that in from America, and I thought, well, I could be doing that alongside some of the other authors. And then Brown Baby happened completely by accident, but it felt like a really nice full stop on that 10 years of work where I'd been writing, I guess, about social issues, and trying to put it in a fictional context, or just sort of trying to use humor to talk about all of this stuff, or trying to use genre to talk about all this stuff. And so it's quite nice to kind of say that that's a very complete body of work. That's my like Marvel Cinematic Universe phase 1 done, complete, and I can kind of move on to phase 2 now, which is what I'm sort of thinking about at the moment.
So the publishers, they sort of, you were approached with the idea about doing a memoir, right? It wasn't something that you had not had this kind of burning desire, because again, I'm so interested in the gap between what's actually going on in the creative process and externally, because again, as a fan of your work, I could easily see how you could draw a line that neatly goes through all of this work and feels like, oh, this feels like part of a plan and a very organic piece of creative development. Because even the comedic novels, Coconut Unlimited and Meat Space, both have elements of them like anxiety about race, anxiety about how the internet is either or perhaps both helping and hindering the way that we communicate and relate to each other. There's a lot of the same concerns in there, but I'm really interested in how externally something can look really logical and organic, but actually within the creative process it's almost chaos. And this like the idea of you doing a memoir just appeared almost out of nowhere, right?
Yeah, I guess it's two things. That one is like I'm probably only interested in like three things, and so,
Yeah.
so that helps. And the other thing is like it was quite a feat to get Coconut Unlimited published and to find the right editor who wanted to make it what it was. And it just taught me that if I stuck to my guns, I should be writing whatever I want. And so I've just been very lucky in that I've ultimately done what I want. And I've just been lucky that people have wanted to publish it. Also, the work's been good as well. But
Yeah.
so after The Good Immigrant came out, like, I mean, you'll remember this time, like I was sort of, I had two young kids and I was going around the country, like talking about racism for a living. And like, as you well know, like talking about all of that stuff and then having that solitary journey home afterwards,
Yeah.
it's like, it all really weighs on your shoulders. And I was just thinking a lot about what kind of writer I wanted to be and how I didn't want to be in that space. I wanted to kind of go back to comedic fiction, but then you kind of go, well, this platform is important and you can do something with it. And so when I was asked if I wanted to write a column for the Observer magazine about parenting, I kind of lapped it up because I was like, yes, I can do this. I can write about joyful things. I can be the Tim Dowling, brown Tim Dowling. But the thing is, like, when you start writing about what it's like to raise a baby through the lens of a brown male, like other things that Tim Dowling probably has not considered before kind of creep in. And so when that column ended, this editor approached me and she said, is there a longer piece in this? And she pinpointed like 3 or 4 columns that dealt with how I talk to my kids about various issues. And I was a bit like, 38? Who writes a memoir at 38? Like my parenting journey hasn't been particularly special. It's been quite ordinary actually, and like you can probably carve out 800 words a week out of it, but I don't know if there's a longer piece of work. And she was like, think about it. And so I thought, well, that central question, how do we raise our kids to be joyful in a world that's so bleak? I nearly swore there. I don't know if I'm allowed to swear. In a world that's so bleak, and I feel so sad and angry about it. It's a kind of a compelling question. It's something that like we're all thinking about. You know, we're all thinking about how to move through this world, and so I thought I could do that, but if I do it, it has to be really honest. It has to be the truth. I'm not an expert, but I'm not an expert on anything other than the truth of our life as a family. And so I was like, I had to kind of then consider, how am I going to make this truthful? And you know, in the tradition of people like Ta-Nehisi Coates and James Baldwin and Ali Wong and David Shariandra, I thought if I just direct, you know, in the same way that I do in the essay in The Good Immigrant, if I just address my daughters, then I'm addressing the readers directly as well. I'm addressing them as though they're my kids, and it'll force me to be honest. And so the book ended up being about all of the stuff that kind of keeps me up at night, all the stuff that terrifies me, and how on earth I managed to keep my kids, keep myself going enough to keep the kids going, even though all of the stuff is like turning me into a raging insomniac.
Yeah, and I mean, because the book is delivered, it makes it very readable and very compelling, because the book is delivered in that way, in the form of you answering questions about how to raise girls as a man, how to raise children being aware of racism, but the whole thing is addressed to the daughters. it makes the thing it gives the thing a real energy. And also there is a lot of comedy in there, and there is a lot, and it's about raising children, so there is a lot of very naturally very funny incidents that come into it. So I don't want people to leave the session with the sense that it's like a dark or a heavy book. And also it's full of references to Spider-Man, which anyone who knows anything about your work knows or anyone who's even looking at the Zoom window.
Yeah. The frame, just there. I mean, this is the thing. Like, it had to be funny and it had to be hopeful. Like, that's because that's my bag. I see myself as a hopeful writer, but also, like, writing about all of this stuff. I think it'll be interesting to hear what you think about this pet theory that I have. But I think you can drive to a deeper sincerity if you push towards a joke.
Yeah, I think that's I absolutely agree with that. And I absolutely think that there's like useful examples where a joke distills quite a complicated idea and can make it more comprehensible to people. But then there is there's a whole other side to the book. I don't think I've ever told you about this, but my pet theory about this book is actually cribbed from, and I guess as the conversation progresses, people will realize that you and I don't want to be reductive about our personalities, but sort of the same guy. Like, sure, we all contain multitudes and no two snowflakes are alike, but realistically, the Venn diagram of your and my life is like slightly it's basically kids and glasses, and that's really the two key separation points, right?
But that's just time. you're just like at least 10 years away from kids and glasses.
Yeah, it's funny though, because you are a few years older than me, and yet somehow I look like you sent back from the future to warn yourself about some grave injustices about it before. But so one of the things that people will find is the ceaseless allusions to various elements of popular culture that are already coming up. That is something that you and I absolutely have in common. But my pet theory about this book is the same as James Cameron's theory about Terminator 2. It really is. Because in Terminator 2, James Cameron said that the secret about that movie is that there are 3 Terminators in the film. There's Arnold Schwarzenegger, Robert Patrick, and Linda Hamilton, who he considers to be the 3rd Terminator. And I can't believe I'm using this as an analogy to enter into what I imagine is going to be the most serious bit of this entire conversation. But here we are. I feel there are 3 brown babies in this book, right? There's your 2 children and yourself, because the kind of most important figure in this book in some ways is your mother. And there's so much about your upbringing that's referenced in the book and your mother's death. And I always feel that you're the sort of 3rd brown baby in the book. And was there a specific idea that you wanted to incorporate some of that stuff into the book? Or is it the case that when you're talking about raising your children, you can't help but reflect on how you were raised and try and glean some lessons from that?
Yeah, I mean, before we answer that, I have to just say that my favorite quote from Terminator 2 is that it is in your nature to destroy yourselves, which I believe is the name of a double comedy album coming out by your good self. Plug. So when I like, the grief thing had kind of come up in those columns, and that grief element had resonated with a lot of readers.
Yeah.
But I don't think that I knew until I was sitting down to write it that actually a large part of how I view my role as a parent is seen through the prism of myself as a child. And because I didn't have my mum there to kind of get advice from, but in the same way that she'd sort of prepared me for being a parent, I just didn't have the external validation from her that I would have wanted. In the same way that, like, my kids don't ever need to read this book, because if I raise them in the way that I'm raising them, they'll know all of this stuff. And that's kind of like thing, the sort of the fracture of time that I wanted to try and achieve with writing it. And yeah, a lot of it is about me kind of reconciling my childhood and how I look back on that childhood and how I sort of yearned for a different life because I didn't understand my parents, and my mum and I didn't really understand each other, but we had that intensely fierce love that kind of propelled us through some really difficult times. But I don't think I sat down to write a grief thing. It just sort of emerged that through writing it, I realized that if I was going to write about my mum being my mum, I'd never really dealt with her death. Like, she died the week before my first novel came out, and at the time I thought, wow, it was a shock, and I was in shock, and I decided that the easier thing to do than deal with my mum's death was to just promote my book and go and do the book events. And all I was doing was just pushing it down and down and down until it kind of erupted when I had a kid, and suddenly I realized that I'd never really dealt with this really big thing in my life. And so writing it, I kind of had to, in order to write my way through my mum's death, I had to kind of bring her back to life, have her die, and me grieve for her on the page almost in real time, properly for the first time, which is was a really hard thing to do. Like, I always try and put myself on the page as much as I can, whether you can see it or not. Like, there's always an element of my truth on that page, but this one, it really counted.
Yeah, and I mean, there's two sections in it that are the specific sections about your mother that certainly reading it for me had such a kind of they were absolute gut punches. And like the last conversation you have with her, which is an argument, was it's kind of heart stopping, and then the kind of uplift that comes after that, where you bring her back to life by cooking some of her recipes. I mean, at reading it, it's extraordinary. The beauty of the writing, the sort of emotional force of it, and for somebody who is like yourself, kind of second generation immigrant, it hit home so intensely and was such a kind of important part about why I love this book. But how difficult is that to write? Because at some point, these things that are, I mean, this book there's blood on the page, to borrow, I think it's Jesse Armstrong talking about Succession, talks about there being blood on the page, and there is absolutely blood on the page and pieces of yourself on the page. And do you have to find yourself setting limits for things that you can and can't talk about? Because at some point, this incredibly personal thing, you're going to have to talk about with somebody who's like having a mundane conversation about word count. And how do you set limits for yourself on things that you aren't going to write about? Or do you just kind of let everything explode out and then hope that you can winnow it down in a way that you're comfortable with?
Yeah, so I mean, it's the same way as, like, as I'm sure you build a show, that like there will be things that are kind of concurrent with the line of thinking that you're pursuing, but they don't thematically work. So they kind of lose stories and jokes and asides along the way. But that first draft, I kind of had to set myself no boundaries, and then in editing it, work out what was going to go on the page and what was going to stay in my heart. And there's definitely stuff that got cut because it just didn't thematically work with what I was trying to do. But what's interesting about having to talk about it is I feel like a sense of calm at the moment when talking about my mum's death. It's almost like this was the thing that I needed to do to work my way through it, which is really, really important. What's weird is when people when people sort of assume a familiarity that's points to stuff that's not on the page.
Yeah.
And like when you lay yourself open in this way, people are obviously going to see parts of their life in it, and they're going to want to talk to you about it. And that, you know, that's great that you've made this connection. But then you kind of then go and do interviews, and where I've written about how promoting a book like The Good Immigrant sent me into such a mental health crisis that I ended up developing a problematic relationship with food, and I write quite openly about that, mostly because I wanted to like talk about what it is to be like. I wanted to talk about some of the vulnerabilities that that just aren't talked about when it comes to masculinity and being a man and stuff. But people are like going, so what's it like having an eating disorder? And you're like, hold on a second. like diagnosing me, like I haven't even given it that language. It's that stuff like that I find really strange. But then I've put it on the page. I spoke to my friend Mira Jacob, who's an amazing writer, and she wrote a book called Good Talk, which is a graphic memoir. And she kind of phoned me up after we did an event. She was like, because she'd written a memoir that would develop talking about similar stuff, and she was like, "Do you want to chat?" And we had because like going from writing fiction to writing memoir is quite a big jump, because you can't hide behind the whole thing that it's fiction. And one of the things that she said to me was like, you kind of have to establish your boundaries about what you will and won't talk about, and just be really, really clear that a memoir isn't everything.
Yeah.
It is the thematic journey that you're taking people on, using your life to kind of put the skin on the bones of well, this is a crap metaphor, but you know what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, I think I know exactly what you mean.
Metaphor halfway through.
This is why writers have second drafts. This
Yeah.
is fine. It makes total sense to me. And briefly, we're sort of coming towards a point at which I think we're going into the dreaded Q&A section. So get your questions ready. I think there's a way for you to submit questions. I don't have the technical know-how to understand how you would possibly do that. But I also want to ask you about the specific term woke feminist dad, because in reading lots of the stuff about this book, I'm slightly mystified. Even a lot of the reviews are very effusive in their praise, but I'm really interested in the idea that people have been reprinting that phrase as though you use it very like casually and very descriptively. How important was it for you? And I think this is one of my favorite things about the book, is to actually interrogate how we use words that you and I use as anxious liberals who spend too much time online, using phrases like woke feminist dad. Like how important was it for you in the book to interrogate the individual uses of those words and the way that we kind of casually throw them around? Because that's one of my favorite things in the book.
Yeah, it's weird because I don't think I use that. I don't think I describe myself as that. I wouldn't even describe myself in life, you know.
Yeah.
You know, it's funny because it's such a funny way of like attributing like parameters to something that I'm actively trying to destroy those parameters, because you know, part of the whole thing is like for me to go, right, this is where I feel vulnerable about stuff. This is where I feel fallible about stuff. This is where I have no idea what I'm talking about. And these are the questions that I have to navigate when it comes to my kid. I don't have any answers. I don't ascribe myself to any particular thing, but here are the things that I'm kind of thinking about. And if I can show that I've got stuff wrong and I'm still kind of forming how I think about stuff, then maybe other people will go, well, actually, this is a discussion worth having. And it's an emergent discussion. It's not a discussion where you necessarily have to land somewhere. Like, like woke feminist dad, I don't even know what that means. Like, I'm raising my kid to be proud of my kids, to be proud of who they are before the world puts certain things on them. And I know that as someone who does anti-racism work for a living, whether like voluntarily or like through writing and stuff, there is a way that I need to be conscious of when I'm talking to my kids about race. As a male, I have to be conscious of how I'm raising my daughters, in the same way that I think men should be thinking about how we raise our sons as well. And also, like, at the same time, the world's about to like fall over from climate catastrophe. We've all seen Greenland on Amazon Prime. Like, we know that like something bad's about to happen, and so there is like that whole existential crisis at the heart of it as well. So yeah, I don't know what use those words are, especially like at the moment where, you know, woke, the word woke has been kind of co-opted by, you know, right-wing columnists to describe people who disagree with them on the left. And it, you know, it's been so stripped of its origins that, you know, you've got people, you know, those same columnists suggesting that its origins are no longer relevant because it's now a movement that's sort of beyond that. And you just think, well, who is responsible for that? It wasn't, it was, you know, so few people describe themselves as woke.
Yeah.
Know? Like it, because of the kind of the weird thing that's happened to that word. It's very strange.
Yeah. That was a personal bugbear of mine, because it's a term that you use almost like satirically in the book, and then in writing about it, people have just used it like completely just taken it at face value and not really thought about why you might be using the term. So I basically just wanted to give you the floor to talk about why that's absolute nonsense. We've got some questions, some very exciting questions. Luna was asking if you could give us a reading from Brown Baby, but I feel like that might be a nice way to end the whole session. So let's hold fire on that. Trishitha asks, question for you both. Do you ever overplay your Indianness in your writing or comedy respectively? If yes, why?
I don't know if I overplay it. I mean, I feel like that is probably a criticism, an external criticism of my work, is that I overplay it. You know, it's just how I move through the world, and so I guess it's the lens through which I cast my eye on the world when I'm sort of thinking about how to write about it.
Yeah. Well, I definitely think you and I think quite carefully about how you, I mean, I made a decision quite early on to not adopt an Indian accent on stage at any point, because that feels dangerously like you're going down a road that ends up in Peter Sellers with boot polish on his face in the party. You don't want to get laughs for the wrong reasons.
Yeah,
especially...
and I made fun of my mum and dad's accents in my first novel, and I regret that.
Yeah.
Like years later, what was funny for me 10 years ago was I'm so vastly removed from it now that I worry about it, you know.
I mean, listen, I'm delighted that there's no record of most of the first 5 years that I was doing comedy. Truly a perfect crime. Trishitha has asked, when you write, is your first motivation to entertain the reader or educate them about the social issues you focus on? Do you think literature is always meant to serve a purpose?
God, these are big questions
These are huge questions
to go to when you got 5 minutes to go.
Especially when it pops up on a Zoom chat window, which you're normally used to seeing things like, can you turn your camera on?
I don't know if my primary goal is to entertain readers or to discuss social issues. I think for me, writing is just the way I communicate with the world. You know, often it's me asking big questions of the world or big questions of myself, and then using the writing to kind of move through those questions. I don't, you know, I think there are smarter writers who see literature as a way of as a way of, well, I don't know what they see literature as, but for me it's a for me people talk so much about timelessness in literature, but I like to think of the books that I do as timestamps, and those timestamps just be really, really present in the moment that they're trying to describe. I write about social issues because I think they're so prevalent in the questions that I have about the world. But I don't know if what I would like to do is to go back to writing funny stuff that is just meant to entertain people, but at the same time, like, funny stuff can still have that line of inquiry that I think is incredibly important.
Fahima has asked, have you ever felt stepping back from completing this work, was there any point that you were concerned of judgmental eyes on work that was so personal to you? I think that's a really good question. I think the idea of, like, when you've written something that's putting so much of yourself out there, does it play on your mind that this is going to be written about, discussed, critiques are going to be written of it?
Oh yeah, and I've read reviews and things where that point out things that, you know, I may not have nailed, or you know, like, I read one review from someone who is an incredibly humorless person, like, finding fault with the comedy in the book. But I'm, you know, in that way that, you know, you always tell other writers, you always tell everyone don't read the reviews, but you kind of end up you do read them against your better judgment. And I think part of the reason I am reading them is because it is so personal, and I just want to know that I just want constant reminder that it was worth putting out into the world. But as I know with The Good Immigrant, like, the thing that I realized after a while is that actually the person who reads your book and never tweets you about it, but it crystallizes something for them in their own life, and they go forth into the world feeling a bit more empowered, that's the person that you need to aim for in a perfect world. But at 1 a.m. when I am self-loathing and I need to beat myself up, I will read those 1-star Goodreads reviews because I need to find someone external to tell me the things I already think about myself.
I really enjoy your ability to answer questions in both the healthiest and also least healthy but most realistic way.
Yeah,
It's like a choose your own adventure version of Nikesh Shukla's life.
yeah. I mean, you just, it's so hard to avoid it. People,
It's so hard to switch off from it. It's so I'm genuinely impressed and amazed by anybody that has a capacity to put something out in the world and then not read, because it's so easy as well.
yeah, people tag you in to the good ones and the bad ones and the lackluster ones and the mediocre ones. They don't care. And what's worse is, like, they will tag you into someone else's tweet about it. And you're like, why are you tagging me in? Now I've read it and I hate myself. Thanks.
We've got 2 minutes to go to the end of the session. Would you be interested in doing a little reading from the book, Mr. Shucks?
Yeah.
Just to round us off with it. I'm sorry that we didn't get to everybody's questions. There were an amount that surprised me, I'll be honest with you. Also, I'd like to congratulate everyone on actually asking questions. Nikesh and I have done a couple of these, and very often people just say a statement and then at the end go, wouldn't you agree?
All right,
Not a question.
I'll read the first bit of the book.
Great.
I never considered becoming a parent myself until my mum died. I'd like to think there was a moment when the switch flicked on, or the force field came down, or the upgrade happened between the hours of 1 a.m. and 4 a.m., plugged into a power source, Wi-Fi switched on. There was nothing like that. Nothing dramatic happened. There was no tearful staring out over a field of bluebells, no Proustian cake-chewing revelation, and no need to cement my legacy. You didn't appear to me in a dream. I didn't read a saccharine poem about inheritance. I didn't hold a friend's baby and suddenly have the final chorus of Barry Manilow's Looks Like We Made It erupt in my head. You just arrived. 1 minute your mum and I were getting drunk at Christmas, and there you were, in my arms, asleep. Your clenched fists covering your face much like they did on the ultrasound. Your nails were long, your eyes were closed. You looked just like her, just like my mum. Maybe it was a trick of my imagination or some sort of sleep-filled, adrenaline-fueled tether to bring you into the family. Maybe you just sort of look like mum in the way babies and old people are indistinguishably vole-like in certain lights. I tried to capture it on my phone, but you know how photographs capture moments, never the narratives that prescribe them. Some photographs lack intent, others capture fragments, and only you can zero in on the history of that moment. Everyone else just sees the vole baby with her claws over her face.
Thank you very much, Nikesh. Brown Baby is available wherever you get books now. And thanks very much to everybody who was watching and listening and sent in questions.
And Nish Kumar has a double comedy album dropping out in 3 weeks' time.
Yeah. I don't actually know how this is going to end. I assume that at some point the Zoom call will hang up on us. But I'm excited that we've managed to get through this with me exhibiting basic professionalism. And then it's ended in disarray.
Thanks, Nish.
Thanks, Nikesh.
Thank you all for watching and being a fabulous audience. Do stay logged on. It is the last day of the festival, as you're aware, and we've been repeating this message a number of times during the festival. The cultural sector truly needs your help. We encourage you to please press that contribute button. Contribute with whatever you can. It will go a long way in helping and supporting the cause. Do tweet using hashtag Jaipur Literature Festival 2021, and our social media handles are at Jaipur Lit Fest. This festival is protected by Dettol.